We're here for another CleanTechnica webinar. Today, we're joined by a couple of EV experts from ABB talking about navigating NEVI as a CPO. So first of all, we'll do brief introductions, and then we'll get into some Q&A. Just to start, we have, again, I'm Zach Shahan, CEO of CleanTechnica. We have Asaf Nagler, VP of External Affairs at ABB E-mobility. And we have Tegan Malloy, E-mobility leader, CPOs at ABB E-mobility. So to start, beyond your titles, could you guys just give us a little bit of an intro on your background in EVs, how you got into this space in general, and then what you're doing at ABB E-mobility specifically? And then we'll get into the details of the Q&A. We'll start with Asaf, I think.
Sure. Thanks, Zach. Good to be here. As always, nice to see your face again and talk about one of our favorite subjects here, charging and NEVI. So I've been at ABB for about 6 years, but I've been in the clean energy space, I don't know, long enough, I suppose, and kind of made the transition over to EV in the past few years. But I kind of cut my teeth in this space back in the Obama administration during the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, where we kind of, as a country at the time, made the largest investment in clean energy in history. And so it's kind of really fun now to be, on the outside, on the industry side, as we make the largest investment in electric transportation in U.S. history. So just really excited to be here, kind of working on these issues from the kind of program side, policy side, to kind of bring about the electric future.
That's a great, to have that thread from the ARRA, the Obama era to today must be quite useful, I'm sure there's a lot that's like, oh, let's link this, let's continue this, let's revive this, that kind of thing. So it must be great to have that institutional knowledge within even one person. I'm sure there's a few others at least who have been involved for a while as well, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. You actually find a lot of former Obama Department of Energy folks throughout the e-mobility industry. So it's really kind of fun to kind of be part of that transition.
And Tegan, what's your background?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, Zach. Nice to meet you. So name's Tegan Malloy. I've been in my role at ABB E-mobility close to a year now, and it's flown by. I started in e-mobility several years ago after we got Chevy Bolt, and I took a long, ambitious trip to Crater Lake in Oregon and had a pretty terrible charging experience and happened to find, I was just out of grad school. I got an MBA in sustainable systems and was really just inspired to make the EV experience better, whatever that meant, right? And I learned that it could mean a lot of things. And I started at a nonprofit called Fourth, and I worked on designing and implementing pilot programs for EV adoption and EV charging, and centered equity in the programs, and then led a team that did that work. We did a lot of DOE funded programs there. I had a stint at Portland City Fleet, decarbonizing the fleet. So definitely got some public sector experience and got to see why things move a bit slowly, and then landed my job here at ABB E-mobility. So I'm so excited to be working on the public charging side of things.
And now you're running fast, sprinting, finding the I'm sure it's a really fascinating sort of progression of roles. We've worked with Fourth a handful of times. Love Fourth. Nice. They do great work. Yeah. And it's funny, I just wrote an article about the Bolt because I was seeing headlines at the top of Google News for a couple of days about a coming $25,000 EV. And I'd written an article about 10 great non-Tesla EVs you can buy in the US now. And I was like, wait a second, the Bolt is barely more than 25,000. It's 26,000 something. So I was like, so I wrote an article about, we already have a $25,000 EV basically in the US, and a couple of our writers have it. Of course, it does have slower fast charging, but all around, it's a tremendous value for the money, which is why it's now the third best-selling EV in the US behind the Tesla Model Y and Model 3. But yeah, that's a great fun intros. I always love getting like, who are these people I'm talking to before we get into nuts and bolts. But yeah, let's get into the nuts and bolts now, I guess. And we'll start by sort of looking at, well, just understanding what the NEVI program is. So, people who are like enthusiastically, obsessively following the EV world, you might be familiar with NEVI, but it's a little bit of an obscure program in the US government. So let's sort of just explain what is NEVI, why should people care about it? Yeah, let's start with that. So we'll go ahead and start with Tegan this time. What is NEVI and why should people care about it?
Oh, I would love Asaf to do what is NEVI, but I have some thoughts on why people should care about it.
Okay, we can give that to Asaf.
Okay. Yeah, obscure government programs. Aren't all government programs somewhat obscure, I think, by definition?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's a million of them. I mean, you have to be in the space to really know what's going on, right?
Yeah. So NEVI, stands for the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program. Why they didn't add a P to the acronym, I don't know. I guess NEVI just sounds better. But it is a $5 billion program that was created as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law, a lot of DC speak here, which passed Congress, gosh, it seems like a year and a half ago or so. And it provides funding for public charging. The money flows from the federal government to the states, and then the states have the freedom to kind of implement their own program as they like. But the idea is to install public chargers within 1 mile of the highway every 50 miles throughout the US. So the idea is really to kind of make sure that folks feel comfortable, that they know they can go somewhere on a long trip or wherever it may be and get a charge. And there are, a host of kind of requirements that come with it. So there's some uniformity on the program. But, it's really focused on kind of trying to make that foundational investment or down payment in the public charging space. Until now, we've really relied on, folks in the industry to kind of do it on their own, even when the market is not fully ready yet, in the sense that, it's a hard business to be a charging provider, right? The vehicles are still coming. And so this is kind of the chance to provide that backbone so that folks get more comfortable around their ability to charge.
Yeah, you need a certain number of, you need a certain utilization rate to make a station profitable. You need a certain, ubiquitousness or kind of, availability of EV charging stations to get people to buy EVs and take them on long road trips, as Tegan was just pointing out, I think. And it's very, very hard to get those EV charging stations who are true pioneers. I mean, I think we owe huge gratitude to anyone in those companies that are, trying to make this happen, because it's a long haul. And even in like the most mature EV charging market, the Netherlands, you have Fastnet, this big EV fast charging network. I'm sure ABB has a lot of deals with them. I don't know, but I'm sure you do. Even they are like, pushing out, the break-even point, the profitability point. So it's a true kind of like long vision, foresight field. And the NEVI program is just like a critical kind of beans and rice support system for that, it seems to me. But Tegan, you
absolutely.
What do you think?
Yeah, well, I'll chime in on the, the fact that this incentive program exists. So not only does it give us some best practices and guidelines for it, but there are a number of partners and emerging charge point operators in the space who have really communicated with us and to us that they would not be getting in the space without the NEVI funds at all. And they've maybe been considering doing it, but this is what's tipping the scale for them. It's, subsidizing assets, it's de-risking, and certainly moving the industry along the way that it was intended. There's definitely some folks that may not last right for that long haul, but I think there are some really good important key players in the space who are not sort of the traditional like legacy network archetype who are stepping into the fray and will be able to make a significant impact. So that's really exciting.
And I don't know if you're referencing, and you don't have to say, but we did recently cover, the big news that Walmart is going to be rolling out fast chargers across the country, which is that's sort of a bit of a game changer potentially, if since they're often located in good spots for road trips, and they're big box, very easy to spend time while you're charging, all kinds of features there. But yeah, I don't know if that's related, but that's what comes to mind when you were talking a little bit. But in general, we love the NEVI program. On the flip side, what is the NEVI program missing? What is it lacking?
Yeah, I mean, if I can jump in here, I'd say one thing that I also think is important to note on kind of the transition is that the NEVI program is competitive, right? So it's not that everyone's going to get the money, but by bringing people together to put plans and programs together, you're taking the big barrier away, right? So, fueling retailers, conventional fueling retailers that may not have thought to install chargers, now they say, oh, well, there's a chance I could get some money for it. Let me put a plan together. And even if they don't win the money, they now have the plan, right? Which makes it easier for them to then adopt and eventually say, hey, you know what? The economics actually turned out pretty good, and we're going to do this anyway, right? And so I think that's something that the NEVI program, provides as well. What the NEVI program is not is it's really focused on public charging for light duty vehicles. It's not necessarily focused on big rigs and heavy duty fleets and so forth. And I think there's kind of good reason for that. I just think about, I live off the 95 corridor here in the Mid-Atlantic, and when you pull off to a rest area or to a travel center, you pull off the exit, and as you're driving up, there's a sign, and the road splits, right? Trucks this way, vehicles this way. And there are really practical and safety reasons for that. And you don't want big rigs mixing with smaller vehicles. They can't see each other. They have different footprints. They need different parking. They would also need different, chargers potentially, different cord lengths, all these sorts of issues, right? So the NEVI program is really focused on the light duty vehicles. And there are other programs, both at the federal level and at the state level, that are focused on fleets as well as the medium and heavy duty vehicles. And maybe we'll do a webinar on that stuff down the road. But the NEVI program for now is really focused on public charging for passenger vehicles.
Yeah, and I wonder if we can maybe just touch on the CFI program, because it's a nice complementary program here, Asaf, but and I think that kind of this program fills in the gaps that NEVI or it's complementary, right? So it's both additive to the corridor fast charging space, but is very much tied to community and community partners and cities and municipalities. And maybe we can take a step back, Asaf, and have you frame what CFI is. But I think that program is $2.5 billion over the course of 5 years. So with that and NEVI, it's $7.5 billion. So not, it's not small. But even with that money coming out, there's still so much. If you look at urban areas that need multi-unit dwelling charging, for example, there's so much charging that needs to be deployed across the country. That all of it is good.
Yeah, could you further explain what the CFI is?
Yeah, another government acronym. I think technically it's Clean Fueling Infrastructure Program. And as Tegan said, it's another $2.5 billion, but it's broken up into one half of that amount is for fueling corridors, similar to NEVI, but instead of the money going directly to the states, kind of local municipalities can apply for the money directly. And so that's kind of a neat feature of it. Your local metropolitan planning organization, your county, your mayor's office, your city can apply directly for those funds. And then the other half is focused on community charging with a focus on environmental justice and equity. And so that can be for highway charging, but it can also be for multi-unit dwellings. It could be for certain fleets and other types of use cases where, you know, you're not necessarily on the highway, but you're in a charging desert in an urban area or in a rural area, right, where you don't have many charging options and power quality is lower and you need to install a charger in your kind of local small community. So that's what that's focused on.
Very useful stuff. I'm learning, and that's always a good sign, I think, because we've written and read tons of stuff about this, but we're really getting into the details here. So NEVI introduces a number of new requirements, both technical and operational. Could you, briefly explain what those are and how you see them being implemented? And I guess a bit further, do you think the industry has any problem achieving these new technical and operational requirements?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot there. So the NEVI program, sets up kind of the, major kind of characteristics of what a charging station, a NEVI charging station should look like. Which, so, some of the, viewers will be familiar with, right? Like 4 chargers that are capable of 150 kilowatts or more of power. But there are all sorts of other kind of requirements that go behind it. On software, on interoperability, on the types of connectors that are used, which are all really important. And I think, the hope is that they really kind of set the new bar for the industry on what charging stations should look like, so that they're easier to deploy and again, more compatible with multiple types of vehicles and so forth. But there are a couple really big ones that I think everyone really is starting to really focus on. And the first one is, Buy America Act compliant, meaning the charger has to meet certain requirements for being produced here in the US. And then, we can talk a little bit about those. And then the second one is a uptime requirement of 97%, meaning that the chargers basically need to run and they need to work 97% of the time.
This is a big one. And this is the one that is really critical. Oh yeah, wait. Tegan can tell us.
Yeah, they're both really critical. And so are all the other ones that come with it. I think that, from our perspective, the NEVI program didn't arise overnight, right? This has been, working at the staff level in Congress for a number of years, actually. And, we've been kind of in those conversations trying to get the program to move forward. And so, the requirements aren't a huge surprise to a lot of the mainstays of the industry. To some newer entrants, they might be. But I think that the US government did a pretty good job of, setting a bar that, in some areas might be a reach, but is also achievable. And so I think they actually did a good job, and they really did convene all of industry and kind of crafting, what those rules are. So I'm confident that we can do it. Honestly, as a technology provider as well, we're really excited about the standards, and we're excited to have it kind of proliferate through the industry, so that we can kind of bring uniformity to the charging experience. Because right now it is really lumpy. You might go to one charger and it's a great experience, and you go to another one and it's like Tegan's road trip back in the day. And so we kind of really welcome that opportunity to have more consistent, uniform, kind of high quality charging experiences for drivers.
It's a little bit like the wild west right now, with which is fun and exciting, but at the same time, it's not what it needs to be in the end. Tegan, what do you have to add on those issues?
Yeah, well, you're making me think of my last charging experience, which also 3 for 3 were issues. And I do want to say that, like, there are so many different use cases for public charging, and a lot of, I think, what NEVI is designed around is to get people from really across the country, right? But there are people who are driving to get to work, not for a vacation, or to drive to earn a living, right? And so when we talk about reliability, it has a lot of implications for an impact to a person in their day-to-day life. It's not necessarily just getting to grandma's for Thanksgiving. And so, that's why, kind of going back to why should we care? We're revolutionizing our transportation, our mobility experience And we still have a lot of work to do. And this program is helping us get there. And I'll say, I've heard, I think Rocky Mountain Institute's done some really good research on, what will help make the charging experience better, right? It's getting chargers more ubiquitous and reliable, I think, are like the two big ones, right? And so there's just lack of charging, and then lack of it working in a uniform way and truly like working when you pull up to it, or maybe it works eventually if you call the call center and they can reset it, and or maybe there's a different way to pay. But I don't want to skirt around. Like, we're making some really good progress, but there's a lot of work that we all have to do in the industry to get where we need to go, in order to meet the demand that's coming with all the EVs that are coming out to market. We're like 6% of market share now for EVs, which is huge. And there's a big transition happening.
Yeah, and I'd say on the reliability piece and on the Buy America piece as well, like for us, we're ready, right? I mean, we've been following this for a while. We just started production at our US manufacturing operations in January. So we are producing our Terra 184 there, 180 kilowatt DC fast charger. We're already producing it here in the US. On the reliability,
what state is that?
In South Carolina.
South Carolina, cool.
On the reliability side of things, we've been providing, ABB as a whole, we've been around for over a century, and we've been providing electrification and automation equipment to critical industries for 100 plus years, whether it's a hospital, data center, power grid, you name it. And so for us, we're just trying to do the same thing for EV charging. And it's not rocket science. But it means that you have to have a well-developed reliability plan, and there are certain components and best practices that I think that NEVI will hopefully help kind of roll out across the industry.
So we're focusing a bit on CPOs, charge point operators, today. What impact is NEVI having on the CPO industry? What have you seen? And I guess maybe clarify too.
Yeah.
What a CPO is versus what ABB is, since people might be confused.
Absolutely. Yeah. So a CPO is a charge point operator, and an entity that owns and operates charging, and fast charging, just as we're defining it here. We'll just be specific about that. And they'll typically, they might own the meter, they might own the real estate, they might own the meter. If they do, they have an advantage, I think. Then they're not necessarily like looking for a site host to make things happen. They are responsible for procuring. They're responsible for doing everything soup to nuts, the project management of deployment, planning and deployment, and then operations and maintenance, which is huge. They also are the ones who ultimately are responsible for the overall driver experience. They come up with the vision for, the marketing and branding, the overall feel, the pricing, right, which is an interesting nut to crack when you're working with electricity and not tangible, liquid fuel any longer. And so they're the linchpins of public charging. They're oftentimes, the ones who they're the punching bag if things go wrong, right? And not only that, many of them aren't making any money. So they're relying on these incentives, whether it be, clean fuels or LCFS credits, might be a big revenue source. They might, they're making revenue from the charging sessions, and then, other incentives that might exist, and then maybe bump in retail if that's their model.
Yeah, and that's when I was mentioning that, the kind of pioneers who are, not making money for years. That's who I was highlighting. Of course, ABB is doing great stuff too, but you guys make money on you sell the stations, you make money on them. You're not, you're not like we'll survive one day. We'll make a profit one day. You're making a profit today, I assume, but I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, so our partners, our customers are the charge point operators, and we're listening to their feedback, finding new, emerging players, and have really kind of parsed them out into several different sub markets. So big box retailers we've talked about, charge and goes are another category, and charge and goes can include C stores and fueling retailers. And they are super well positioned for the NEVI corridor charging, just because of the nature of how they're laid out, location wise, and amenities wise. And then there are the networks, right? Regional and national networks. There are, I would say, real estate developers getting into the fray. We'll see some like renewables companies that are more sort of just investors. I feel like I'm missing utilities own and operate public charging as well. So those are sort of some of the flavors that we're seeing for charge point operators. And, I think we mentioned earlier that NEVI is having an impact on these folks by lessening the risk for them. And as Asaf mentioned, they're putting together they're making plans for deploying EVSE that they would not have done otherwise. They're considering it. Now, I'd say some of the biggest challenges I'm seeing in terms of hurdles to making progress are that they might be on board, but they don't necessarily have headcount yet, right? Like they're sort of in the early stages where they're missing one person or two people who are dedicated to EV fueling on their team. And, that's small. If you look at like the big network providers who have hundreds of folks on their team, compared to two, it's very different. But some of the, let's say, charge and goes are really well positioned for O&M because they have technicians. That's what they do. They're all about the experience of the, some of them are for the customer. So,
yeah, I think that's a really, the kind of roadside highway convenience and fueling stores are some of the most exciting areas right now for NEVI, right? Because think about whatever region of the country that you live in. You obviously, they're the national fueling retailers that you think about, like Exxon or BP or whatever they might be, the Shell, those large operators. They're along the highways already. But then every region has their own kind of special thing, right? If you're in the Mid-Atlantic, Northeast, you have Wawa. Everyone loves their Wawa, right? And if you go down other parts of the country, people are in love with Love's or Buc-ee's or Quick Trip, or there are like dozens of these. Royal Farms, right? You name it, right? Sheetz, Pilot, all these guys along the highways, right? And so they're really looking at making that transition to electrification, and it's really exciting because they also have the ability to kind of balance some of the difficulty on making revenue on electricity with the fact that they, sell drinks and sandwiches and snacks and all those other amenities that drivers are used to receiving along the highway. And in some ways, those kind of groups and organizations are really excited and in a great position on NEVI.
Yeah, it's funny when sometimes it would be like a press release, like, "Oh, this giant fueling, network is going to install EV chargers." I'm like, "Who is this?" It's like you have to find what region they're in. But increasingly we're getting a picture of what this general geographic network looks like because one after another is sort of announcing it's getting into EV charging. So I guess we've talked about who's applying for these funds. It sounds like it's these people, these companies. And then what are some of the key questions or considerations that you have to ask partners, or partners are asking you when you get into this funding stream?
Yeah, I think things that we really want to spotlight are, whether or not, if you're talking to your hardware or your technology provider, really evaluating whether or not they are Buy America Act compliant, and understanding how long they've been preparing, their factory in the US to produce chargers that actually meet the compliance. I feel like there's a lot around reliability, but
Yeah,
Asaf, I don't know if
they probably asked for, can you guarantee you'll be 97% reliable?
Yeah. So that's the other thing, right? Like a lot of so I guess a question you could always ask is your partners, right? Is does the applicant have an SLA, a service level agreement, that ties back to the charging manufacturer? That's a super important part to driving reliability, to make sure that the charging OEM can support what is being promised by whether it be the software company or who the CPO is working on the reliability plan, but making sure that you're in contact and have an agreement with your charging OEM is key. Asaf, do you want to chime in on a couple more of these, because we can rattle off a lot?
I think maybe it's because like my second graders doing like multiplication now and stuff, but I think about like when I was a kid and in school, and you always do like your math homework or whatever, and you could either, some people just like wrote the answer because they knew it, but the teacher would always say show your work. And I think it's kind of like the same thing with NEVI, is show your work, right? Anyone can say, oh yeah, we guarantee we'll be 97% uptime, or we guarantee that we'll be Buy America compliant, or any of these other OCPP requirements and so forth. And my advice to those partners would be, ask your partners to show their work, right? How do you actually meet it? If you don't meet it today, what's your plan for meeting it in the future? And kind of get into some of those specifics, and don't be afraid of the specifics, because if you haven't really thought deeply through all of these issues, you're not going to have a successful program. And this is something that we saw back in 2009 during the Recovery Act. In the first round of chargers that went out there, people just threw them in the ground and like walked away, and then most of them just broke, right? And no one was there to fix them, and people didn't have plans to do that and so forth. And so we just issued our own kind of white paper that talks about best practices for reliability, and there are a lot of things you can do in there. One is having an SLA, doing preventative maintenance, having trained technicians that are actually like live in the same region as where the chargers are, actually have spare parts that are stocked or available, do remote diagnostics and monitoring. So there are all these things you can do. So it's not actually a hard answer to show your work, but we think that when states are thinking about the NEVI program and operators, CPOs are thinking about their chargers, they really should ask the tough questions of their partners and providers. And the end result of getting into the weeds and the details is a better driver experience. And I think that's what we all want.
Yeah, that's a great point. That seems critical. I mean, as a parent, my 6 and 8-year-old daughters, they hate to show your work. It's like the answer. This is the answer, obviously. And I'm like, sometimes like, yeah, I don't know, just explain it another way. Like, obviously that's the answer, but but I think in this case, this is critical, because everyone's going to say, oh yeah, we're going to be NEVI compliant. Oh yeah, we're going to check all these boxes. But you want to make sure. This is a big deal. You want to make sure. You want to see the work, see the proof, right? What were you going to add, Tegan?
Yeah, well, I was going to add that I'm particularly fascinated by the opportunity for workforce development and training technicians, and leveraging partners who might be, say, in the charge and go space, who have these technicians who are servicing gas pumps, for example, who have the opportunity to be trained and learn how to work with DC fast chargers. And it's such a natural synergy to be able to transition and do some workforce development there, and have some developed long-term partnerships there, in terms of where, say, ABB E-mobility can develop service partners too. So anyway, just there's some interesting opportunities.
That having technicians in the region really jumped out to me, because this is an issue I've seen across continents. I've seen this in Europe as an issue, where it's like they'll be, you know, hundreds of miles away, and it'll be like, it might take days, or even in a bad situation, it might take weeks before the technician gets to the charging station. And it might even be a simple, easy fix. It's just like restart the station or something, or, you know, something, you know, increasingly you can do stuff remotely through software, but not always. And sometimes
90% of the time, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But good to make sure. Oh yeah, we have a service network. Okay, but do you have like one person for the East Coast? Do you have like 3 people along the East Coast, or do you have like one in every region? You know. But,
yeah, I mean, this thing about it, like your Apple Store or whatever it is, you know, there's always somewhere where there's an authorized retailer or authorized repair shop or something like that. And you know, I think that's ultimately where, you know, we're going to be headed, right? We have our own staff, but also working with partners. We have training centers. We have a training program. You get a certificate at the end of it, right? That you're trained by ABB to work on ABB chargers. And it's classroom time. It's hands-on time. It's not something you can do in half a day, right? These are some intensive courses, and I think, you know, that's ultimately what we need, and just kind of growing that base of trained technicians.
Yeah, I can't help but noticing the Formula E on your sleeve, and you know, ABB's connection to Formula E. You know, important to just have these pit stops, these quick, you know, pit stop solutions.
That's right.
But you mentioned a best practices white paper. Are there any other best practices? I guess maybe perhaps less obvious or notable as well that we haven't covered.
You know, I think those are the big ones, right? It's blocking and tackling, right? Remote diagnostics, preventative maintenance, trained staff, and then stocked spare parts. I mean, those are the big 4 things that you need to have. Now, there's a lot that stands behind that, but those are the 4 things you need. And the one kind of piece that ties all of them together is what Tegan mentioned earlier, which is the service level agreement, which just, we're in America, right? So we love contracts, right? But it's a piece of paper that says, when something breaks, this is who's responsible for doing what. And that's a key piece here. So, because in charging sometimes, and you'll see these memes online, right, where it's like, you know, this person,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, that seems critical, right? It's like, yeah. Well, I'm a big tennis fan, you know, and in doubles tennis, you know, you want to hit the ball down the middle because it's you know, no one knows who's going for it. You know, it's like, oh, I thought you were getting it. You know, this is the best winning strategy on a. So it's sort of that case. You got to make sure you know who's going for it. You got to make sure you know who's getting this or who's getting that. You know what the plan is. That's a great point. And then, you know, we talk mostly about what CPOs should be looking for from technology providers, but on your end, what are you looking for? I mean, if someone wants to buy ABB chargers, what are you saying? Like, well, do you have this in place? Are you going to maintain them in this way? Are you going to do that? What are you looking for from your partners?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're
money.
You know,
like, show me the money.
No, you know, it's not so simple, right? I mean, we want partners that we know are going to be there next year, right? And we try to kind of work together in that way with them.
And I'll let you keep going, but I just, you know, you guys have the ABB logo on your stations, so you're going to take a reputation hit if you sell a charger to a company that's not going to be on top of things, right? So I mean, that'll then come back to hurt you. So I'm sure you do care, but yeah. Keep going. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, we want responsible partners. We want to be, you know, we've been in this industry kind of as a founding member of the EV charging industry, right? And you know, we're looking to kind of continue to grow with our, you know, old established partners, and also kind of bring the new ones on that are dedicated to the space as well. And so yeah, it's not just trying to throw these out there, but we don't want to put a charger out there, particularly under NEVI. If you don't have a service plan and trained technicians, either with us or your own staff that we've trained, it's just not going to end well for anybody, right? So, you know, we kind of want that. We're looking for partners that really.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't say it better, and I'll just add that, you know, we're encountering all sorts of new folks emerging in the space, and some have their heart and like the commitment and the heart in the right place because they want to improve the charging landscape, right? They're interested in it. They see the writing on the wall and they're pivoting their business model, whatever it might be. And then there are some that are just getting into the game because there's some money right now available, right? And they're not necessarily like, there's right, just a few of those, right? So I think we were working with folks who are really, I think, seriously thinking about the long term, right? It's not just like, hey, we just want to get some money for NEVI year one. You know, it's so much more than that. And because it's so complicated and challenging to be a charge point operator, I think, you know, we're certainly not ever wanting to find ourselves in a position where we're trying to convince anyone that they should be taking on the responsibility of being a charge point operator. It's a hard job. So we're really working to do as much as we can to set our partners up for success, right? So we're, you know, oftentimes bringing in different partners who need to be on, say, the bids or, you know, whatever needs to happen to get the charging in place and play matchmaker sometimes, right? So there are folks getting into the space who don't know, who maybe are like, well, who do we work with, right? This is all new. It's overwhelming. There's the paradox of choice. And so, you know, we're interested in showing up as a long-term partner and consulting companies on maybe questions they should be asking their partners, right? And to do the due diligence to select the partner that works best for you.
And there's so much business here. There's so much to do. I'm not sure if this comes into play here, but you know, you mentioned earlier supporting multifamily communities more. Is there any ESG component going on within ABB where you're trying to expand access, equitability, and that kind of stuff with this program? Or I mean, this program is focused on road trips, you know, focused on certain frequency within certain corridors. So I don't know if that comes into play here, but just came to mind as a question.
Yeah, I don't think that's, you know, on the CFI, there's some there, but I mean, ABB, we make EV chargers, right? So we're like squarely on board. ABB as a whole has 2030 sustainability targets that we agreed to that put us on track to support the Paris Accord. We've had all of our goals, you know, audited to make sure that it's realistic and it's reasonable.
We also rely on buyers, so you can't just go and push charging stations into play.
Right.
I mean,
but the work. So we have our own internal, what we can do in our own operations, right? But also the technology that we provide in general. It's about, you know, converting to electricity, cleaning electricity, and being more efficient, right? So it's really kind of sustainability is kind of in the DNA and the core of what it is that we do. And you know, we put out the chargers where we can, but you know, we can only go with where the market is, right? And because we're not an owner and operator, you know, we're not the ones putting it in particular parts of the country or communities, but we're there to support where we can. You know, one big area, certainly on the equity side, where we're, you know, you really kind of see the ABB charging impact is definitely like in transit and in trucks and buses, which often, you know, pass through and either move, you know, disadvantaged communities around. Or pass through disadvantaged communities and often leave, you know, smog and waste in their wake, right? And so those are really big opportunities in areas where we are very active, and there is, you know, viable business there, right? For doing that. So we work with partners.
Large charging stations. I love the overhead chargers. Of course, they're always picturesque for trucks and buses for several years now. So yeah, I mean, I think I interviewed your CEO maybe a decade ago about you know, just ABB's overall kind of, it's sort of like one of a few clean tech juggernauts where you have your hands in every clean tech field. You have you know, your whole company is very a core part of this sustainability revolution and energy and technology. So yeah, and I guess the NEVI program itself is sort of, it's got an equity component to it because the point is to make them every 50 miles, you know, to make EV charging stations available on every route, every 50 miles, you know, so that you're not leaving big gaps in whether rural New Mexico or some of our people, our writers and editors live, and or other places where it's easier to leave a gap if you're a CPO who is just trying to survive. But one more question here. Yeah, let's get into some numbers. So what are key specifications to look for when procuring NEVI compliant charging solutions? What are the numbers here?
Yeah, I think that we talked about some of the key ones already, like Buy America compliance and 97% reliability, and so forth. 150 kilowatt chargers. I think the list, we have the document together in the data sheet, right, on all the NEVI requirements and specifications, and the list is really long, right? And so I'm not going to bore your viewers with
Has anyone read the entire list from top to bottom in one sitting? I'm just kidding.
Yeah, multiple times, right? Where you can cite them by page and verse, right? What all those things are. But they also, as issued, they aren't always so clear, right? They jump around a little bit, so you need to kind of put them in a way that makes sense to a administrative regulatory proceeding, right? But they don't necessarily make sense to a commercial player in the industry who wants to know that their charger lines up with the spec and what's required. So I would say they're all. Yeah,
and you probably have a version of the list that's like the list and then a long checkbox row, a column of checkboxes. Check. Yeah, ABB does all of it, right?
So yeah,
it'll be available on the website soon.
Essentially, yes, right. But the thing about specifications and requirements is that they're specifications and requirements, right? You can't pick to follow one and not the other, because then you wouldn't be compliant, right? So I think the advice there is to just, as we said earlier, show your work, right? Show how you meet all of them, and if you don't meet all of them today, what's your roadmap and path, to be compliant?
Make sure you got a signed contract on that. Tegan, anything to add on the specs before we jump to a final question?
No, I think, well, I'll just add that there are the things that are outside of the specs that I think make an impact from an ROI perspective that we see our partners thinking about, which is, things like, what is the impact of it having an all-in-one unit versus, that takes up less real estate, right? If real estate is at a premium. I don't think that's in the requirements of SOF from the federal government, right, but that's certainly a requirement for our partners, right, that they're asking about. So I think they're sort of the things that are outside of the federal requirements, but that we see as market requirements that we're considering and baking into design and the process, the multi-year process for design in the future.
So I think we've talked about this throughout, or you guys have, especially, even I have a bit, but what role do you see ABB playing in making NEVI a success? Like, what's your I
think we're your trusted partner who's been here in the e-mobility space for the past 13 years. We've been in business for the past 125, and we're going to be here for the next 125, right? And I think that's.
And I have to say, you don't look 125 at all.
Yeah, right. Judging by the wrinkles under the eyes. But I think that's one of the big ways that we help contribute to a successful NEVI program, right? We're not a fly-by-night operation. We didn't just get into this yesterday, and we're going to be here tomorrow, and the day after, and the year after, and the decade after, right? And so we're your dependable partner who is, thought through all of the issues and thought through all of the requirements, and we know how to actually really actualize them.
Yeah. I'll also just add we're incredibly collaborative. We've got such a collaborative group, and are adjusting when we get feedback to what the direction is, right? We don't know everything. The industry is changing rapidly, and we are we're moving quickly along with the rest of the incredible partners in the space, and are working to constantly improve. So
it's great stuff. I mean, I always love talking to ABB people. Like, it's been, I've been on trips with you in Switzerland and in Nevada, different places, you know, different people. Your company is humongous. You're doing so much good stuff. So it's always just great to connect, always expert, you know, you feel like you're talking to the experts, you know, the people who are really know what's happening, know what's up. And it's always humbling and exciting to talk with you guys. So thank you for what you're doing and your whole team, however big ABB E-mobility is. I'm sure it's quite large. And, you know, hopefully we're going to make NEVI a huge success and propel. I was going to say earlier, yeah, we're at 6%. As you mentioned, Tegan, EV adoption in the US. Europe was at 6% a couple of years ago. Now they're at like 15, 20% EV adoption. You know, you sort of start growing faster and faster, you know, as you get up that steep adoption curve ramp. But it's just a couple of years ago, we were at 2%. And I think when you're getting into 6%, you start having more mainstream buyers, more people who are running companies or programs who have EVs, and they realize, hey, yeah, we really need to be in this. So I imagine it must get easier and easier for you to partner with companies and people who have an EV or who are sold on it because they see where everything is headed, much easier than a couple of years ago or back in the Obama administration era when probably a lot of people didn't believe in it. So I'm sure your job gets easier year by year. But
let's hope.
But thanks. Yeah, let's hope. Thanks for what you're doing. Cheers. Any questions anyone has for Asaf or Tegan, be sure to drop them either under the YouTube video or on our articles about this. So thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you, Zach.
Thanks.